Welcome to the deep dive. So, you sent over a really fascinating stack of material, all sort of circling this big question: how do people really work inside organizations?
Yeah, it's a great collection.
So, think of this as our mission, our deep dive.
Hmm.
We're aiming to pull out the most important nuggets from these sources. We're looking at organizational behavior, attitudes, groups, how organizations develop.
Culture, different ways to even study OB,
Mm-hmm.
and fundamentally what drives individual behavior at work.
Exactly. And there's quite a mix of viewpoints in what you sent, which is good. It suggests we can get a pretty rounded picture, hopefully one that's easy to digest.
Absolutely.
Prepare for maybe some aha moments,
Yeah.
about why people, maybe even ourselves, act the way they do on the job.
Definitely. And looking through this material, one thing that jumps out right away is how much our thinking about this stuff has, well, evolved. A really interesting place to start that story is with the Hawthorne studies.
Okay, yeah, the Hawthorne studies. Famous stuff. So the original plan, back in the 20s at Western Electric, it seems pretty straightforward, right? They just wanted to figure out how, like, physical things, lighting, breaks, how that affected productivity.
Makes perfect sense on the surface. They were coming at it from a very mechanical viewpoint,
Yeah.
thinking about scientific management, optimizing tasks for efficiency.
Right.
But here's where it got interesting. What they actually found was, well, productivity seemed to go up pretty much regardless of the changes. They'd make the lights brighter, output increased,
Mm-hmm.
they dimmed the lights, and output still often went up.
That's the classic finding, isn't it? The real puzzle. It sounds like they tripped over something totally unexpected.
Exactly. The big realization was that the act of being studied, the workers feeling like someone was paying attention to them, interested in their well-being,
Yeah.
that was a much bigger motivator than the physical changes.
Ah,
And that's where we get the term Hawthorne effect. It just hammered home that psychological factors, social dynamics, feeling valued, being part of a team, these things were hugely influential, often more than the purely technical stuff.
so it wasn't really about the light bulbs themselves.
Not primarily, no.
It was more about feeling like management cared about the light bulbs and, by extension, cared about them.
You've got it. It was a fundamental shift. It highlighted this human need for recognition, for feeling seen. Even today, think about just getting regular feedback. It taps into that same need.
That really did change things, didn't it? Moving away from just seeing people as cogs in a machine.
Absolutely fundamental. The Hawthorne studies basically forced managers and researchers to think differently, to acknowledge the human relation side of things. It really laid the groundwork for OB as a field.
Makes sense. The human side isn't just fluff, it actually drives performance. Okay, so building on that foundation, your sources also talk about broader models for understanding behavior. Lewin's equation comes up.
Ah, yes. Kurt Lewin. B equals F, P, E. It sounds simple, but it's quite powerful.
Break it down for us.
Sure. It basically says that behavior is a function of the personalization, their internal traits, personality, attitude, skills, all that, and
Right.
the environment, the external situation. So leadership style, your team, the company culture, the office layout, everything outside the individual.
So it's always this interaction. You can't just look at the person in isolation or just the situation.
Exactly. You could have a brilliant person struggle in a toxic environment, right? Or a really supportive environment might help someone perform better than you'd expect just based on their raw skills. It's the mix.
That feels very true to life.
And modern OB models really try to integrate these ideas. They take the old school focus on structure and efficiency.
The scientific management stuff.
Right. And they combine it with the insights from human relations, motivation, communication, group dynamics, which, thinking back to Hawthorne, makes perfect sense. If social factors matter, we need to understand things like individual attitudes, the P, in Lewin's equation.
So it's not choosing one over the other anymore, structure or people.
No, definitely not. The key takeaway, really, for anyone managing people is that you need both. You need efficient processes, clear roles at the technical side, but you also need to address the psychological needs, motivation, connection, support. That's where you get the best performance.
Okay, looking at behavior through multiple lenses. Let's zoom in then on one of those key P factors, attitudes. Your sources outline several different types we see at work. What are the main ones?
Right, attitudes. In OB, we think of them as these learned ways of thinking and feeling that influence how we act at work. They generally have three components. Cognitive, what you think or believe.
Like my boss is fair.
Exactly. Then, affective, how you feel emotionally.
I like my team.
Yep. And behavioral, your intention to act a certain way. I'm going to volunteer for that project. So a really big one is job satisfaction. Pretty straightforward. How positive or negative you feel about your job overall.
And that links to performance.
Generally, yes. Higher satisfaction often means higher productivity, less absenteeism.
Yeah.
Someone saying, I actually enjoy coming to work, so I put in the effort. It just feels right, doesn't it? When you like your job, you try harder.
Yeah, absolutely. What about organizational commitment? That sounds a bit broader than just liking the daily tasks.
It is. It's about loyalty, attachment to the organization itself,
Yeah.
and the sources break it down nicely into three types. There's affective commitment.
Yes.
That's the emotional connection. I want to stay here because I feel like I belong. Then there's continuance commitment.
Okay.
That's more about the costs of leaving. I kind of have to stay because I'd lose my benefits or seniority. It's just too difficult to leave.
Right, the practical side.
And finally, normative commitment. That's the feeling of obligation. I should stay because they invested in my training, or it feels like the right thing to do. Higher commitment, whatever the type, usually means lower turnover.
That want to, have to, should distinction is really useful. Explains why people stick around for very different reasons.
Okay, what about work involvement and employee engagement? They sound similar.
They're related, definitely, but slightly different. Work involvement is about how much you psychologically identify with your specific job. Is your work a core part of who you are? High involvement often means more effort, taking initiative.
Like someone who really geeks out on their specific role.
Kind of, yeah. Employee engagement is maybe a step beyond that. It's the emotional investment and enthusiasm, not just for the job, but for the organization's goals and success. Engaged employees are passionate, innovative, they often provide better customer service. They're really all in.
So involvement is job-focused identity, engagement is that, plus emotional connection to the company's mission.
That's a good way to put it. And then, of course, there's the flip side. Job dissatisfaction, negative feelings, leading to things like calling in sick more often, poor performance, maybe quitting. You can often spot it: constant complaining, reluctance to help out. And the sources mention other attitudes too: positive, negative, neutral, even ambivalent, right? Being aware of these seems crucial for managers.
Absolutely critical. Attitudes are a bedrock for understanding behavior, team success, individual performance. And the good news is, managers aren't helpless. They can influence attitudes through creating a good environment, recognizing effort, offering growth opportunities.
Okay, individual attitudes are clear. Now let's shift to how people come together. Let's talk about groups and organizations. How do we typically categorize them?
Sure. So in OB, a group is basically two or more people who interact regularly and share common goals. And they hugely influence behavior, productivity, motivation, communication, everything really. The most basic split is between formal and informal groups.
Okay, what makes a group formal?
Formal groups are deliberately created by the organization to achieve specific goals. They usually have defined roles, responsibilities, rules, maybe a hierarchy. Think of a command group that's like a manager and their direct reports straight off the org chart. Or a task group put together for a specific project, often temporary. Committees are formed to solve problems or make decisions. And cross-functional teams pull people from different departments like marketing, engineering, sales, to work on something together, like launching a new product.
So formal groups, organizationally defined, work-focused. What about informal groups?
Informal groups just emerge naturally, based on friendships, shared interests, social needs. They aren't officially set up, but wow, they can really shape the culture and how things actually get done.
Examples.
Well, friendship groups, people who just like each other, maybe always eat lunch together. Interest groups, folks who share a hobby like a running club or maybe campaign for a cause together. And reference groups, these are groups people look to when forming their own attitudes or making decisions. They influence behavior.
Like the cool kids table, but at work.
Sort of. These informal networks are powerful. They affect morale, how information travels sometimes faster than official channels, and how people react to change. One source mentioned a running club that accidentally improved communication between departments.
That's interesting. So formal gets the official work done, informal shapes the social fabric and the real way things operate.
That's a great summary. And managers really need to understand both. Formal groups for tasks, informal groups for morale, change management, understanding the grapevine. The sources also mentioned temporary versus permanent, open versus closed groups, just showing the variety out there.
Right, understanding the human infrastructure. Okay, let's pivot to how organizations change and improve. Organizational development, or OD. What's the core idea there?
OD is essentially a planned long-term effort. It uses behavioral science ideas to make the whole organization work better and improve employee well-being. It's about intentional, positive change. Your sources lay out a pretty standard 7-step process.
Okay, let's walk through them. Step 1.
Problem identification diagnosis. First, you've got to realize there is a problem or an opportunity. This often involves some initial data gathering, maybe quick surveys, interviews, just observing to get a handle on performance issues, conflicts, communication gaps, maybe culture problems.
So sensing that something needs attention, what's next?
Step 2, data collection and analysis. Now you dig deeper. Systematically gather info from employees, teams, departments, questionnaires, feedback forms, group discussions. The goal is to find the root causes of the issues identified in Step 1.
Moving from a hunch to actual data. Step 3.
Feedback and discussion. This is crucial. You share the findings from the data analysis back with management and employees. Have open talks. Build awareness. Get people ready for change. It builds trust and transparency.
Makes sense. You need buy-in. What follows the feedback?
Step 4, planning the change. Based on the data and discussions, you develop clear goals, SMART goals, ideally, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and you create action plans. This is where you decide on the specific strategies, maybe new training, restructuring, new policies.
Got the plan, now the action.
Exactly. Step 5 is intervention implementation. You actually do the things you planned. Roll out the training, launch the new system, make the structural changes. Communication here is absolutely key to manage resistance and keep people informed.
Okay, the change is happening. How do you know if it's working? Step 6.
You got it. Step 6, evaluation of change. You measure the effects. Did you meet the goals? Are the KPIs improving? Collect more feedback. Observe what's happening. See if the intervention actually made the difference you hoped for.
And finally, making it stick.
That's Step 7, reinforcement and institutionalization. You make the successful changes part of the normal way of doing things. Reinforce the new behaviors, systems, maybe the new culture, through rewards, recognition, making sure policies support the change.
Yeah.
Embed it in the organization's DNA.
So OD isn't a quick fix. It's a cycle: diagnose, act, evaluate, reinforce, constantly adapting. Now, closely related to this is organizational culture. Why is culture getting so much attention lately?
It really is.
Yeah.
Organizational culture, those shared values, beliefs, norms, practices, basically how we do things around here.
Yeah.
It's increasingly seen as vital for success, and for good reason.
Why the increased focus now?
Well, first, a positive culture genuinely boosts employee motivation and performance. People feel valued, respected, engaged. They do better work. Simple as that.
Okay.
Second, it improves teamwork and communication. A culture of openness and collaboration breaks down silos, makes it easier for people to work together effectively.
Makes sense.
Third, it's huge for talent attraction and retention. People want to work in good environments, places with purpose. A strong culture attracts the best people and makes them want to stay. Reduces costly turnover.
That's a big one in today's market. What else?
It also supports organizational change and innovation. Flexible, learning-oriented cultures help people adapt. And innovation thrives, where it's okay to experiment, maybe even fail sometimes, and learn from it.
So culture impacts adaptability.
Definitely. And fifth, it shapes the brand image and customer experience. Happy, engaged employees tend to provide better service. Think Zappos, Google, maybe Infosys, known for their cultures and customer focus. The internal culture radiates outward.
That connection is really clear.
And finally, culture acts like an unwritten rulebook. It guides behavior and decisions, especially when things are uncertain. People know what's expected, what aligns with the values, without needing constant supervision.
So culture isn't just nice to have, it's a real competitive edge.
Absolutely. A
Yeah.
strong, adaptable, ethical culture is a major asset. That's why companies are actively investing in it through leadership, training, hiring for cultural fit.
Okay, we understand OB, attitudes, groups, development, culture. Let's look at how we study OB. What are the main approaches to studying organizational behavior?
Right, there are several different lenses we can use. One key one is the human resource approach, sometimes called the supportive approach. This sees people as assets, not just costs or tools.
Focus on people.
Exactly. It emphasizes growth, participation, development, support. Think open communication, good training programs, treating employees well to get the best from them.
Okay, what's another approach?
The contingency approach. This one says there's no one best way. The best OB strategy depends on the situation, the environment, the culture, the people involved, the task.
So it depends.
Pretty much. Like a leadership style might need to change depending on how experienced the team is or if there's a crisis. Flexibility is key.
Adaptability again, makes sense. What else?
There's the systems approach. This views the organization like a system. Lots of interconnected parts,
Mhm.
individuals, teams, departments all working together. Inputs lead to processes which create outputs with feedback loops.
Like how HR, finance, and marketing all have to work together for a product launch.
Perfect example. Each part affects the others. You need to see the whole picture. Then there's the productivity approach.
Focus on results.
Yeah, this one links OB directly to performance, efficiency, cost saving, profit, maximizing output for a given input. Think performance incentives tied to specific output goals.
So measuring the bottom line impact.
Right. And finally, the interdisciplinary approach. This recognizes that OB is complex, so it borrows ideas from lots of fields: psychology for motivation, sociology for group dynamics, anthropology for culture, economics for decision-making, even political science for power dynamics.
Pulling from everywhere to get a richer understanding.
Exactly. Using insights from motivation theory, psychology, alongside group behavior concepts, sociology, gives you a much fuller picture. These different approaches make OB a really flexible field. Managers can pick and choose based on what they need.
So multiple toolkits available. Now, let's drill down to the individual level again. What are the key determinants of individual behavior at work? What makes each person tick differently?
Yeah, this is fundamental. Why do people act differently in the same workplace? Again, Lewin's B is FPE is relevant, but here we're focusing hard on the P, the person factors. Your sources point to several main determinants.
Okay, let's hear them. First up.
Biographical characteristics. These are the more surface-level things. Age, gender, education level, marital status, work experience.
How do these affect behavior?
Well, we have to be careful not to stereotype, but sometimes research shows correlations. Maybe younger employees adapt to new tech faster, or older employees have lower turnover rates. They can influence things like punctuality, energy, maybe adaptability.
So basic demographics can offer some clues. What's next?
Personality. This is much deeper. The unique, pretty stable pattern of traits someone has. Are they introverted or extroverted? Confident, open to new things, conscientious. This heavily influences how they handle stress, interact with others, solve problems.
The Big Five model fits here, right? Openness, conscientiousness.
Exactly. Extroversion, agreeableness, and eroticism. Personality is a huge driver of workplace behavior.
Makes sense. What else determines how we act?
Perception. How we individually interpret information and situations. Two people can see the exact same event very differently based on their past experiences, attitudes, even their mood at the time, and how they perceive it dictates how they react.
So reality is less important than our interpretation of reality.
In terms of driving behavior, often yes. Then attitudes, which we've discussed. Positive or negative feelings about the job, the boss, the company. These directly impact motivation, performance, satisfaction.
Right. Positive attitude, usually better teamwork.
Typically. Then we have values. These are our core beliefs about what's right or important. Honesty, fairness, achievement. They guide our decisions and behavior, often learned early and quite stable. Someone valuing honesty is unlikely to cheat, for example.
Or internal moral compass.
Precisely. And finally, motivation. That internal drive to act. What needs are we trying to meet? What rewards do we seek? What goals are we aiming for? Motivation is what energizes and directs our behavior towards achieving something.
So it's this whole complex mix, background, personality, perception, attitudes, values, motivation, that shapes how each individual shows up at work.
Exactly. Managers need to understand this complexity to manage people effectively.
Okay, one last area mentioned in your sources. Group discussions, or GDs. What are they and how do they fit into OB?
Group discussions are basically structured conversations. A group gets together to share ideas and opinions on a topic. Think team meetings, brainstorming, sometimes job interviews use them.
What's the goal?
It varies. Could be problem-solving, decision-making, generating ideas, sharing knowledge, improving communication, or even evaluating how people interact in a team.
So more formal than just chatting.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
Usually 4 to 12 people, a specific topic, and an expectation of listening, contributing respectfully. They're really useful in OB because you can see attitudes, communication styles, and teamwork skills in action.
And the sources included a chart classifying groups. How does that relate?
Right, remember, formal versus informal groups, task versus interest groups, command groups versus self-managed, temporary versus permanent. The type of group having the discussion definitely influences the dynamics.
How so?
Well, a formal task group discussion might be very focused on the goal. An informal interest group discussion might be more exploratory. A command group discussion might follow hierarchy more. Understanding the group type helps you anticipate how the discussion might go.
So GDs aren't just about the topic, but also reveal group dynamics in different contexts.
Exactly. They're great for fostering collaboration, getting diverse views, and developing skills like leadership, communication, critical thinking.
Wow. Okay, this has been a really comprehensive deep dive. We've gone from the Hawthorne studies, surprising everyone,
Yeah, showing that people matter.
all the way through attitudes, groups, OD, culture, the different ways we study OB, individual drivers, and even group discussions. It's amazing how interconnected it all is.
It really is. You can't really understand one part without considering the others.
And that Hawthorne, finding the power of just paying attention, the human element, it really does echo through everything else we've discussed, doesn't it?
It's a constant theme. Technology changes, structures change, but understanding the human side remains critical.
Hopefully, exploring all this gives everyone listening maybe a richer way to think about their own workplace, the dynamics they see every day.
Absolutely. And maybe a good point for reflection for listeners is thinking about everything we've covered, individual factors, group dynamics, culture, all of it. Is there one aspect of your own work environment or maybe your own behavior at work that you see a bit differently now?
Or maybe what's one area that really sparked your curiosity? Something you'd want to explore more?
Yeah, great questions to ponder.
Definitely food for thought.
Hmm.
We really encourage you to keep digging into these themes if they've caught your interest. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.